Fire at will!
Sergeant, fire at will.
Fire! Fire! Fire!
That's a lot of fish. And welcome to a pop culture look into movies. I'm Azza the Pop Culture Viking, and today we're going to be looking into my favourite childhood guilty pleasure movie, 1998's Godzilla. And with the new TV show and sequel coming out soon, I wanted to look into this love it or hate it film on its history, its pop culture impact, and its spot in cinema. Now before we get started, if you do like videos like this, don't forget to hit that notification button, don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and if you're just joining us and want to see our previous videos, feel free to click here, and if there's a movie that you'd like me to cover, feel free to comment down below, and with that being said, and with spoilers ahead, let's get into it. So for those who have been living under the biggest rock in the world, Godzilla is one of the most famous movie monsters of all time. Created in 1954, Toho in Japan, Godzilla was released to Japan and the US audience. Thanks to the wide release of the film, Godzilla became a pop culture icon, becoming one of the most famous movie monsters of all time, and becoming the longest running franchise in history, which at the time of recording, 33 Toho films, 4 legendary picture films, and of course the one we're talking about, TriStar's Godzilla 1998. But before shooting even began, American producers have been trying to get permission to make an American Godzilla film for over 10 years. But finally, Toho gave permission and finally agreed, where Sony Pictures eventually got involved with discussions on getting the rights to being able to make an American Godzilla film. Sony producers Cary Wood and Robert N. Fried proposed the idea to Columbia Pictures, who just straight away turned it down as they were worried about the possibility of the film being camp. Then they pitched the idea to TriStar, who also turned it down as the studio didn't see the commercial potential and thought that it wouldn't make a great film. I'm sensing a pattern here. But Wood and Fried instead ignored the producer's advice and went straight to the CEO of Sony Pictures, who absolutely loved the idea of a Godzilla film, as he quoted, "The fire-breathing monster? Yeah," as a potential international brand opportunity, and set the film up at TriStar. TriStar Vice Chairman Ken Lamberger was sent over to Tokyo to oversee the deal in obtaining the Godzilla rights from Toho in mid-1992. Sony's initial offer, as shown on the screen here, also included that Toho was allowed the rights to make domestic Godzilla films while TriStar developed their own film. But under one condition, Toho sent Sony a dossier of rules on how to treat Godzilla in order to make the deal. In October 1992, TriStar formally announced their acquisition of the rights to Godzilla from Toho to produce a trilogy of Godzilla films, with the promise of remaining true to the original series, cautioning against nuclear weapons and runaway technology. Oh, this is going to be interesting. So now that TriStar had the rights to make a Godzilla movie, now it was time to find a director and to make the script. Well, this is complicated. So finding a director, TriStar hired Jan Den Bont, who directed Twister, Speed, and Speed 2 Cruise Control. And as for the script, Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio were hired to write the script, and they have written for films like Aladdin, Mask of Zorro, Small Soldiers, and then later on Shrek and the Pirates of the Caribbean films. Now I bet you're wondering, wait, that actually sounds promising, what happened? Well, this is where it gets complicated. So Ted and Terry actually turned down the offer from TriStar several times as they didn't know what to do with the Godzilla character, but the duo were eventually convinced after a meeting with TriStar and agreed to take on the job. But their initial thoughts that they were hired was because they were sci-fi buffs and have had experience in franchise type titles. The duo actually came up with a script that was true to Godzilla and keeping everything Toho wanted and gave the film a Moby Dick inspired vibe. But then Jan Den Bont came on board and wanted to change the Godzilla story. D. Bont would have discarded the character's atomic origins and replaced it with one where Godzilla is an artificial creation constructed by Atlanteans. Sorry, what? But D. Bont ended up leaving, but Ted and Terry stayed on board to complete the rewrites and job done. But then TriStar hired Don McPherson to rewrite the Elliott and Rossio script. Now McPherson was a huge fan of Godzilla, so he was brought on board to make some last minute changes in the rewrites, as TriStar had budget concerns. So after many rewrites, the script was ready. Okay, now with all that drama trying to make the script perfect, now it's time to find another director to make a Godzilla movie. But surely they made a good choice, right? Right? Prior to the release of Independence Day, Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin were offered to take on the job of Godzilla under one condition, that Emmerich and Devlin would make it their own way. And guess what they did with the amazing script that was written for them that Emmerich and Devlin praised? They just chucked it in the bin. Excuse me? So Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin actually wanted to make the film their own way, so first thing they thought of Godzilla as a fast-moving animal out of nature, rather than some strange kind of creature. And Emmerich's statement about the original script was, it had some really cool things in it, but it was something that I would never have done. The last half was like watching two creatures go at it. I simply don't like that. Isn't that the point of these movies? And in developing a new idea, Emmerich stated, "I didn't want to make the original Godzilla, I wanted nothing to do with it. We used just the nuclear origins and that's it. We forgot everything about the original Godzilla right there." They even turned down the offer originally because they thought it was a dopey idea. So they hated the idea of a Godzilla movie and thought it was stupid, but took the job anyway, threw out the amazing script, did everything they could to ruin the Godzilla character because Roland and Dean hate Godzilla movies? Okay, who's the fucking idiot from TriStar who let the inmates run the asylum? Okay, well after all that trouble, let's just take a break from the town of f***wit run by Mayor dickhead Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin, and let's have a look at the cast that we eventually got. We'll start with Matthew Broderick as Nick Totopoulos, who has the easiest name to pronounce.
Dr. Nico Topopoulos. Dr. Nico Papadopoulos.
Nick Papadopoulos believes the...
Look, I know he has a Greek name, but f*** me. We have fan favourite John Reno as Philippe. You turned down the role of Agent Smith in The Matrix to be in this.
Oh, thank you very much.
We have Maria Patillo as Audrey, Hank Azaria as Victor. Just FYI, there's 3 Simpsons voice actors in this, including Hank Azaria. And Kevin Dunn as Colonel Hicks. Yeah, I don't think a lot of people were keen to be in Godzilla 1998 because I couldn't find any alternative castings. Okay, now let's talk about Godzilla. So you remember the list of rules that Toho gave to the producers? So that was a 75-page dossier of what they can and cannot do with Godzilla. Well, here's the main list of rules that was given. Try and guess what made it into the film from the list. So many of these points were disregarded as creator-designer Patrick Totopoulos, sound familiar, never received the list of rules despite director Roland Emmerich having forwarded to him. Now, prior to Roland and Dean coming on board, Stan Winston, who has worked on films like Jurassic Park, were hired originally and actually designed Godzilla. And it actually looked like Godzilla and an additional monster called the Griffin for Godzilla to fight in the original script. But Patrick Totopoulos was brought on board to redesign Godzilla, and the only instructions he was given was to make Godzilla look fast, which we ended up with the design which kinda looked like a xenomorph-esque style from the movie Aliens, along with the colour scheme to match the urban environment of New York, and was planned to use CGI. They did try to animate Godzilla with motion capture, but it ended up looking like, air quotes, a guy in a suit. Are you fucking serious? Totopoulos and Emmerich had a meeting after the designs were complete, to which Toho responded with, and I choked on my orange juice with laughter at this. They remained silent for a few minutes, they were speechless, they stared at it, and they were in silence for a couple of minutes, and then they said, "Could you come back tomorrow?" Like, they were so in the designs of Godzilla that they actually couldn't change it, and they thought that they lost the film. But the next morning, Toho approved, surprisingly, and with principal photography beginning on May the 1st, 1997, and wrapping on September 26, 1997. And with a release date of the 20th of May, 1998, Godzilla was brought to the big screen. But now let's look at the positives and the negatives of the film. Okay, let's get the negatives out of the way, shall we? I mean, this whole bloody movie's a massive negative, am I right? Shut up. Well, I want to start with the characters in the film because, well, most of them are very annoying and are very unlikable. For me personally, the only characters I do like are Jean Reno and Hank Azaria, but for the other people, everyone else just comes across like idiots and just do stuff that piss you off. Also, you know the mayor and his assistant? Yeah, they're called Mayor Ebert and Gene and are parodies of film critics Gene Siskel and Robert Ebert. Because Siskel and Ebert have given Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin films like Stargate and Independence Day bad reviews, but more on that later. Bet their review is going to be great after this. Now I want to talk about the military in this. First, why is it the military's first thing to do is to just shoot straight away and not actually monitor the situation before blowing shit up?
Fire! Fire! Fire!
Like, they even get told off for blowing up the buildings, and they still blow shit up, and they get like 100 helicopters to chase Godzilla. Like, the military tactics in this film are the most inaccurate I have ever seen. Also, it's bad enough that they can't pronounce Nick Totopoulos' name correctly, but there's a moment where they just don't listen to him. Like, he talks about the nest being possible because Godzilla is pregnant. Oh yeah, Godzilla is pregnant in this film, by the way. And he gets sacked from his job because his ex-girlfriend, who works with the media, stole the VHS tape with government information on it. Why is Nick in trouble? Bloody prosecute Audrey, she's a shit reporter anyway. The CGI in this is fucking rough too. I mean, I did watch this as a kid, and once I hit my teen years, my god, my eyes adjusted. It's very noticeable, and Emmerich and Devlin were known for relying on computer effects and staying away from practical effects. Now, the third act, it's basically the Velociraptor scene from Jurassic Park, and it's definitely obvious that it was inspired to make this scene. And not only the blending of CGI and the guys in suits is just way off, but they don't feel like a threat to the main characters. I mean, they kill the French Secret Service agents, but there's moments where a chandelier or gumballs stop them from killing the main characters. and it just makes the babies look like a member of the Three Stooges. As for the final look at Godzilla, I sometimes can't help but to play this in my head every time I watch Godzilla 1998.
By my mother's mandible, I say nay!
It's the Crimson Chin!
Now, there is some part of me that doesn't mind the design, and I did grow up with this as a kid, and it did grow on me. But now that I'm older and I've seen more Godzilla films, I can't help but agree that they should have just kept the original Stan Winston design. For starters, they treat Godzilla like an animal instead of being an indestructible monster like in the Toho films. But there are moments where the size of Godzilla is off, like sometimes he's huge and other times he looks smaller. They purposely got rid of the atomic breath and replaced it with a power breath, which did get a lot of backlash when it leaked, and it gave it some sort of poor hybrid one, which we see here. And I said it before, Godzilla can become pregnant and lay eggs, which does feel like that they did that on purpose so they can have that Jurassic Park moment I mentioned earlier. And having Godzilla killed by fighter jets while tangled on the Brooklyn Bridge, like, it's not a bad idea for a scene, but the idea of Godzilla is that he's immune to military and man-made weapons, and it's just a bad decision to just have him killed like that. Honestly, they should have just stuck with the original Godzilla fights another monster plan like they had before Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin got their tiny hands on it. But look, there are some positives and there are some things that I do personally like about the film. The first act is definitely a great start to the film. I'm glad that they kept the nuclear origins in it, but for some reason they replaced the Japanese nuclear testings with the French nuclear testings instead. I like the mystery of John Reno's character and the subplot of the French investigation of Godzilla. The path of destruction Godzilla causes before we even see him is a great build-up, like the ships getting destroyed and the giant footprints, and the introduction of the first attack in New York is a solid scene. Like stepping over the highway, stomping through the fish market, smashing through buildings, and people screaming and running in fear. And Hank Azaria trying to catch footage of Godzilla. That first act definitely got people on board with this film. Everything else, just chuck it in the bin like they did with the script. There are some scenes where Godzilla does actually look good on screen, like the way he dives into the water and standing on the Empire State Building. The New York setting is definitely a solid idea, and the mystery on how Godzilla is able to hide is an interesting mystery. And lastly, after the babies were killed in Madison Square Garden and Godzilla dies, they did tease at the end that one egg survived in planning the sequel, which probably would have got people interested considering what they had planned. Alright, now that we covered as much as we could, what about the overall story that we got? Fucking hell. Well, following the French atomic bomb testings in the South Pacific, an unknown creature is spotted heading towards New York City, and scientist Nick Totopoulos is called in to investigate. The creature known as Godzilla makes his way to Manhattan, beginning wreaking havoc in the big city, where Nick's team and the US military must find a way to stop Godzilla. And lastly, what did fans and critics think of the film along with its box office, merchandise and marketing? Well, for the fans and critics, I'll let Obi-Wan Kenobi take over real quick.
Oh, not good.
So with the reviews from fans and critics, Godzilla holds a Rotten Tomato score of 20% for critics, and fans with a score of 28%. Now for the negative critical response, it has stated that it was due to the performance, directing, and script, and has said that the film didn't have heart and stomped on the classic monster, and has been labelled by critics as one of the worst blockbusters ever made. So remember when I mentioned the famous film critics Gene Siskel and Robert Ebert? Well, surprise, I actually did give Godzilla a review, with Robert giving it a 1.5 out of 4 stars, and Siskel actually mentioned that, well, we're in the film, but they put us in there and we're not squished to death or eaten, so why bother putting us in the film? And Siskel listed it as one of the worst films of 1998. Fans pretty much agree with the critics, but the main issue is the portrayal of Godzilla and what made Godzilla a pop culture icon just tossed in the gutter. But let's face it, the new Godzilla will rip this Godzilla's head clean off. As for the box office, with a budget of $130 to $150 million, the film made $379 million at the box office. So while it did make money, word of mouth spreaded and lack of interest gave the film a 59% drop in its second week. The marketing and merchandise was bloody bonkers on this. Now, some producers from TriStar watched the film before its release and knew it was going to be bad, so they pushed the marketing hard on this. And Emmerich didn't want any advertising showing the full Godzilla before the film's release. The teaser trailer was released during the cinema release of 1997's Men in Black. The teaser trailer alone cost $600,000 just for the fucking teaser trailer. And the full trailer was eventually released during the cinema run of Starship Troopers. Taco Bell made a $20 million marketing deal in promoting the film, with commercials featuring the Taco Bell Chihuahua trying to trap Godzilla. The 90s was just fucking tops, wasn't it? Trendmasters manufactured the toys for the film, including an 11-inch tall Living Godzilla and the 21-inch tall Ultimate Godzilla. However, poor merchandise sales for the film led to a cancellation of a toy line based on the animated series. And the toy company eventually went bankrupt due to the Godzilla deal. And it has been estimated that the worldwide marketing cost $80 million in total. And they didn't even use NBA's own Charles Barkley in the marketing. Thought I'd forget, did ya? Godzilla was released on VHS and DVD in November of 1998, along with special features. It also earned $8.04 million in video rental sales in the first week and sold 400,000 units by the end of 1998. And NBC made a $25 million deal for the broadcasting rights in the United States, and would release multiple special edition Blu-rays in the mid-2000s and late 2010s, which include the special features of all-time best Godzilla fight scenes, featuring 3 episodes of Godzilla the series. Speaking of Godzilla the series, originally Godzilla was supposed to have a trilogy of films where the next film was to be set in Sydney, Australia, hometown represent, with Nick Totopoulos returning, and to have Godzilla fight giant monsters, with the next film featuring a giant bee monster called the Queen Bitch. Hollywood, am I right? But the films were cancelled due to the backlash and lack of interest, and TriStar let the rights to make sequels and remakes expire in 2003. But Godzilla did continue in an animated series called Godzilla the Series, where some of the ideas for the planned sequels were carried over into the show and directly continue straight from the films, and has surprisingly been better received by critics than the film, and does randomly pop up on certain streaming platforms. Now, looking back at Godzilla, it's definitely a hot mess of a film, with Toho stating that the film was a disaster and have distanced themselves from Godzilla 1998, being no longer canon, and have referred to it as Zilla or Gino, aka Godzilla in name only, as he resembled a lizard, which was pretty clear in the film. Both Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin have defended the film for years and were keen to make the sequels as originally planned. But Emmerich has admitted that he did regret making the film and didn't take the film seriously and was never a Godzilla fan. And Devlin has apologised and admitted he screwed up, blames the script writing with Emmerich and understood the mistakes and takes full responsibility. Matthew Broderick, on the other hand, liked working on the film during a 2016 podcast interview, but thought he was miscast, and failing to understand the film's poor reputation given that it made a lot of money. Because the film was made by an arrogant director and producer? Just because it made money doesn't mean it's a good film. Even Hank Azaria was disappointed with the film, as he saw it as a career move to boost his profile, which didn't work, and noted he got sick several times during the rain scenes. But he labelled Godzilla as a poster child for everything wrong with Hollywood in terms of budget and marketing, adding that the advertisements looked better than the film itself. For me personally, I'd much rather have a recurring voice role on The Simpsons plus residuals than to star in a Godzilla movie. Now, overall, Godzilla is definitely one of the worst cases of executive incompetence. Producers had a perfect opportunity to bring Godzilla to Hollywood in the 90s, but due to the poor choice in TriStar choosing a director and producer who weren't fit for the job, and an even worse choice for Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin to just take the piss out of a beloved movie monster, Godzilla is still remembered as a guilty pleasure film, especially for 90s and early 2000s kids like myself who grew up watching the films. And while it's remembered for the wrong reasons, it is a lesson learned for Hollywood, which did lead to the eventual reboot in 2014, which was not only successful but has gone on to make a new list of sequels, crossovers with King Kong, and a new TV series. But that's all the time for we have today, guys. Let me know your thoughts on Godzilla 1998, and if you do like videos like this, don't forget to hit that notification button, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and you can follow my socials down here as well. And if there's a movie that you'd like me to cover, feel free to comment down below. And as always, as I say at the end of these videos, I'm As the Pop Culture Viking, always love pop culture, and don't forget to smile.
Miss Hoover, the movie's over.
Down in front!